Ezekiel 47 and Ezekiel 43. As we continue our series on racism, I need to be really honest with you. And I hope that you'll be honest with me, honest with yourself. And most of all, I hope you'll be honest with yourself and the Lord in your relationship with Him. But as I've gone through, prepare this sermon this week, there's a couple things, there's a dynamic that God has created. One of the things is this. It's been shocking to me to see and realize what a struggle that I'm having in preparing these lessons. Now, I want to be careful how I say this because I don't want to be taken out of context. So let me preface it with this. This is a statement I've said several times as we prepare for this series and as we go through this series. Here's the truth. Here's the truth that not a lot of people want to admit. But regardless of your race, regardless of your color, everyone's racist to some extent. Okay? So as I've prepared these messages, and this week was particularly a struggle. Last couple of weeks, preaching on love, the cure for racism, that's a pleasant thing to preach on. It's a pleasant thing to talk about. There's some messages that are more pleasurable to prepare and some less. But there's a real struggle. And that struggle is seeing what areas of my life that I have to allow God's love to deal with in the area of racism. And so I want to challenge you. There's something about being a communicator. For nearly 20 years I've been a communicator. And as a communicator, when I preach, some classes that I took would teach us to look at this point on the wall, that point on the wall, that point on the wall. But here's the reality. When I preach, as I watch you, kids hate this. But after 20 years of being a communicator, I'm not God and I can't see into your heart, but your emotions and your facial expressions and your response, your posture, I know. I know whether you're soaking in the Word of God and whether your heart is taking it in, whether your heart is open to God. And here's what I want to challenge you with. What I'm about to preach this morning is going to be as much a struggle for you as it is me. More than preaching, what I want to do is put some ideals out there, put a concept out there, and I want you to go home and struggle with it and God this week. But here's the question you're all asking. Why is it that we're dealing with this issue of racism? Why is it so important, Pastor? It is extremely, extremely important that we deal with it. The future, not only our country, but the future of this church. It depends on it. As we talked about, and we have talked about, and I'll be more specific, succinct, and to the point as we go through the sermon, but there's an incredibly important reason why we deal with it. And over the years, as I've talked about racism, taught on racism, the good Baptist will show up on a Sunday, he will sit, he will endure, and go on home. But there's more at stake than enduring another sermon or another lecture or hearing about racism. Remember, we've learned that racism reveals a contempt for God. It really does. So that's part of the reason. But the question you have to ask yourself this morning is, so what does that have to do with me? How does that affect me? How does that affect my children, my grandchildren, the church where God has called me to serve, to live, and to love, and the community in which He has planted me? How does my contempt for God affect everyone around me? Because racism is a real contempt for God. Because as we've said, God created all of us in His image. But it's more than that. It's right here where we live. There's more to it. And so with that, before I lay everything on the table, what I want to do is I want to try to just methodically teach you some concepts, challenge you with some ideals, and I want you to go home like Jacob and struggle with God this week. Wrestle with God. Because we all need to. Don't just endure another lecture about racism. Because I promise you it's far more important than that. There's some things that God showed me this week that I had never seen. That I didn't know. Hence led to the struggle. See, God not only created us all in His image, all of us to bear His image. He created us, though, to live with Him and to live with others in community. How do you reconcile that truth with racism? And so as we look this week, I want us to learn about God's ideal of humanity and community living together. Here's the key word that's going to unlock everything that I'm challenging you with. And so the way I'm going to teach it is going to be a little bit lenient. A little bit laying the facts out on the table. But after I lay the facts out on the table, as we come to the end today, God had made it very clear to you what areas you need to allow Him to deal with in your heart with His love. You just sat through another session on racism. But think about God's intent. God's intent for us to live together in community. The key word that you need to write down that will help you open up, understand what we're talking about today is kingdom. You need to understand that all that we do, all that we are, revolves around kingdom. Now, this ideal, the concept I'm going to give you today, I'm going to give you some ideals and some concepts. And then next week, I'm going to deal with some real history, some of our history. Not all of it's really pretty. But the key to understanding it is this ideal kingdom. If you've studied the book of Matthew, it's not a my ideal, it's a Jesus ideal. So as we look at this idea of God's kingdom, some have called it, many before me have taught on this issue. Not all have, I don't know any that's kind of honed it toward racism, but absolutely it touches every area of our life. And what some have called it before me is the kingdom agenda. But the key is kingdom. The key to understanding, the key to overcoming, all that we need to understand is this concept that the church has overlooked, and it's God's kingdom. What do you know? What do you understand about God's kingdom? Let me define it for you. Here's God's idea. Here's God's understanding of kingdom. Here is a one-word way to explain and understand God's agenda, God's kingdom agenda. Here's another word you might want to write down, and it's oneness. Oneness. The church, as we think about it, will never embrace God's agenda, God's kingdom. You know, another church seminar is not going to cure the problem. Another talk, another seminar at work to address the issue of racism, our government, none of those things is ever going to cure the problem. The cure for the problem is when we encounter God ourselves. Our agenda has to give way to His agenda. Let me ask you in your life. I want you to do some soul searching with me this morning. At what point in your walk with God have you given up your agenda for His agenda? If you don't know, and I'm not asking you for a specific date, but part of maturing and growing as a Christian, you never ever reach any measure of maturity until that point in which your agenda. You surrender to God for His agenda. What is God's agenda? You know how I know that this is the weak point, the extreme weak point in the church today? Because as a pastor for 18, 19 years, when I teach the Old Testament, what I find is most Christians, I'm not trying to be dramatic, I'm not trying to be over dramatic, but I find most Christians and even most pastors don't understand the Old Testament. Because without Jesus Christ and without the cross, you cannot fully understand the Old Testament. So all of that has to do with God's agenda. And as you look at it in a broader sense, here's what the Old Testament tells us. It tells us today what it has always told us. It teaches us God's agenda, which should be our agenda. Even in the Old Testament, even in the New Testament, God's agenda has never ever changed. What is God's agenda? I want you to look with me there in Ezekiel 47. I want you to read with me the first 12 verses. I want you to listen to me as God is laying out His agenda through the prophet Ezekiel. Now remember, those of you that have gone through the Wednesday nights with me, you understand that prophecy is a here and now and a hereafter. When God gave prophecy to the prophets of the Old Testament, it dealt with the there and then and the us at the same time. So what that means is God's laying out His heart to Ezekiel for His chosen people. And you see it connects. When people talk about the Old Testament, when they talk about racism, when they talk about ethnics and all those things, they go to the Old Testament and they point the way that God called out the Hebrews to set themselves out from all other people. But most people don't understand why. Because God's agenda then is what it is now. And God is laying it out to Ezekiel. He's telling Ezekiel, here is my kingdom agenda. And it's still the same today. Listen to what He says in Ezekiel 47. Then He brought me back to the door of the temple. And behold, water was issuing from below the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced east. The water was flowing down from below the south end of the threshold of the temple, south of the altar. And then He brought me out by the way of the north gate, and led me around on the outside to the outer gate that faces toward the east. And behold, the water was trickling out on the south side. What are we talking about, Pastor? Think forward to heaven. But think back to God's agenda. Where we are now. Going on the eastward, with a measurable line in his hand, the man measured 1,000 cubits. And then he led me through the water, and it was ankle deep. Again he measured 1,000, led me through the water, and it was knee deep. Again he measured 1,000 and led me through the water, and it was waist deep. And again he measured 1,000, it was a river that I could not pass through. The water had risen, and it was deep enough to swim in. A river that could not be passed through. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? And then he led me back to the bank of the river, and as I went back, I saw the bank of the river, very many trees on one side and on the other. And he said to me, this water flows toward the eastern region. It goes down into Arabah and enters into the sea. And when the water flows into the sea, the water will become fresh. And wherever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live. And there will be a very many fish. For this water goes there, and that water of the sea may become fresh. So everything will live where the river goes. Fishermen will stand beside the sea from Engedi to Egom, and it will be a place for the spreading of nets. Its fish will be of very many kinds, like the fish of the great sea. But its swamps and its marshes will not become fresh. They are to be left for salt. And on the banks, on both sides of the river, there will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither, nor the fruit fail, but they will bear fresh fruit every month, because the water for them flows from the sanctuary, God's sanctuary. And their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for healing. What I need you to understand, what's going on is God's giving Ezekiel a great picture of what God has planned for us. Far beyond the earth we live in today. But don't miss out why that God is telling Ezekiel and why the prophet Ezekiel is giving it to the people of Israel. You see in the Old Testament, what Ezekiel 47, 1 through 12 tells us is this. It gives us God's purpose. And God's purpose has always been that God's power and that God's presence was to flow through the temple, but from His people. God's power and presence, it's always been God's agenda that it flow from us. You see, as you read chapter 47 of the book of Ezekiel, you see God's plan is for community. And for humanity to be united and experience community together. That's God's agenda. I want you to think about that for a second. As you look around at the state of the United States and you look around at the state of the world, does it look like humanity is enjoying any kind of real community? No. You see, God's plan always was for His power and His presence, His love to flow through us to others to bring them into that community. All that God's talking about in Ezekiel 47, that He's preparing for the future. Hey, heaven was prepared for all of humanity. For God's creation. To live in community. Together. But do you see how God's agenda gets accomplished? The same way it's always gotten accomplished through us. Through us. Now, what does that mean? What that means is, as we look at that today, it hasn't changed. It is still to flow, not from the temple today, but from us, the church. Not this building, but from you, your heart. From your heart to others. To all colors, to all cultures, to all ethnic people. Let's be honest with each other. Is that the way it works? Look around and answer that question. The church today has built some great buildings. It's built some great ministries. The church today has built some great programs, but it has missed God's agenda. Because we expect people to flow into us. God's agenda, God's kingdom agenda, is that God's presence and power flow through us to them. Do you know the most difficult thing to be a pastor for the last 20 years? I'll be honest with you. A lot of pastors don't even want to deal with the subject. And I'll be flat honest with you. It's to address the fact that God's presence and power does not flow well through the church. Don't believe me? Look around. We come, we sit on Sunday. Do you know it's been like pulling teeth without Novocaine to get you to commit to come to our evangelism revival? And all we're going to do is teach you how to let God's love, power, and presence flow through you. But not just us. Go to other churches. We expect all the lost culture to flow in. That's not how God ever expected it to happen. for His power and presence to flow through us and out to them. For us to reach other cultures. Look up. Because of a lack of understanding of God's agenda in the Old Testament, a lot of people don't understand. God never intended for the Jews to sit over here. Even the Jews lost sight of His expectations, His kingdom agenda. And so God's agenda through the Jews was for them to reach other cultures. So, but I thought He said, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. All that was about was them not worshiping idol gods. It was for them not to allow their idol beliefs to flow into them, but rather for their God to flow through them into others. Let's be honest. We're not doing a very good job of that today. But that's God's agenda. That's God's purpose. Was for us to allow His presence to flow out through us to every tribe, in every tongue, in every nation. Let me be honest and frank. It couldn't be a more timely message. As I was getting ready at the house to leave to come to church this morning, it was on TV. Can I tell you why that 90% of churches are failing to do God's agenda? Which means that 90% of the churches in America are pursuing their own agenda. That's why there's so many church splits and wars and mad people. That's the truth. I just love you enough to tell you. But I want you to think about something. Here's our problem. Here's the problem is this. And I've seen this for a long time. And this racism is a part of this. Not all of it, but a part of it. The problem is we've wrapped our Christianity, our Christian faith, in the American flag. That's a problem. That is a problem. I know that's a challenging statement. But it's a truth that Christians need to get their heart around this morning. What happened Friday night? Colin, the quarterback for the 49ers, refused to stand for the American flag or the American anthem. And then on the news, right after that this morning, there was Trump touting his policy on immigration. I'm going to say something that's going to make some of you mad. My intention is not to make you mad. My intention is for you to wrestle with the truth that I'm trying to tell you this morning, trying to challenge you with. And no, you don't know how I'll vote. I'm not sure I know how I'm going to vote right now. But that quarterback's problem and Trump's problem, or not Trump's problem, but our country's problem with immigration, it's a racist problem. It's a racist issue. There it was on TV this morning, one after the other. Now, I know I've challenged you and some I've flat ticked off. How about listening to me the rest of the sermon and tell me what you think of me when we're done? Just listen to me, okay? Been married for 20 years. I can handle it. Lost you right there. It's all right. You needed to breathe. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm putting truth out there that I need you to wrestle. You don't have to 100% agree with me, but you go home with God and wrestle with it this week, because I have this week. Okay? See, those are symptoms, and the problem is we've wrapped our Christian beliefs and our faith up in the American flag. That's dangerous. That is very dangerous. What we've done, listen to me closely. Here's the point I wanted to make. Not that Trump is a racist. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying all of that's symptoms of racism in America. Here's the point that I need you to understand. This is what I need you to wrestle with this week. We've created a religion that's foreign to God's intention, because we've wrapped our faith up in the American flag. Now, I want you to understand a biblical truth. God does not allow any government to influence the beliefs of His church. I know you can agree with that because that's why we founded this nation, regardless of what they teach you in history. God does not allow any government. Yeah, I'll back it up with Scripture in just a second. To influence the beliefs, the truths of our faith that He has given us. Let me put it this way. God doesn't allow any government to trump His role. No pun intended. He doesn't allow any government to assert His position. When we allow government to influence the church's nature and its presence and its biblical view, it's nothing short of idolatry. So, well, Pastor, what do you mean about that? Here's what I mean. However you grew up in the white community, that's how you view Christianity. That's how you view the world. If you grew up in the African American community, that's how you perceive and that's how you understand things. If you grew up in an Asian community, that's how you perceive things. But take that and then look at the fact that I said that God doesn't allow any government or belief system to take His place. Because when it does, that amounts to adultery. That's what we've done in America. See, our problem is not necessarily that they've taken prayer out of school. That's a symptom. Symptom is that we've taken God's faith once delivered for all to the saints. Hebrews, you've read that before. We've wrapped it up in the American flag. And it's become, and we expect God to become subject to our American faith. There's a problem in the church today, and the problem is this: the church worships our American heritage and our history more than it does the God of our fathers. If you don't think that's true, you try to stand up here and bring change to a church that needs to reach a culture and community that it lives in and that is changing. All those splits in the churches that you know, there's some of you who can name off 10 splits in the last 10 years in this community. What we've done is we worship our heritage and our history more than we do God. And when you do that, you can't follow God's agenda because His agenda is different than our agenda. And the fact that we have all the turmoil in the churches that we do, forget racism out there, look at the churches. Because this one has an agenda. This power broker in the church has its agenda, their agenda rather. None of them is God's agenda. That translates, I'm not preaching on change, I just need you to understand the reality of the fact that we have taken heritage and history and put it over God's agenda. So I want you to think that through. See, the problem is this. Our country has become a victim of racism. Worse yet, regardless of what color you are or where you sit at the table or your ethnic background or whatever, worse yet is this. All of America, including the church, has become defeated by this victim mentality. Here's a truth that I need you to understand this same person cannot be a victim and a victor at the same time. A victim and a victor at the same time. You can't be a victim and experience victory at the same time. See, but here's the key to getting back on the track of God's agenda. Here's the key. The church, you and I, we have victory in Jesus. Listen to what the Bible says in Romans 8:28 and 8:37. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. For those who are called according to His purpose, no, in all these things we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. The only way we'll ever see racial harmony in America, the only way we'll ever see unity in America, is if we adopt God's agenda. I've been preaching that for 20 years. The church will never see unity, or oneness. See, that's the explanation of God's intent, of God's kingdom agenda, is oneness. You never see it until we adopt God's agenda. This country will never see racial unity until the church adopts God's agenda. I know that what I'm putting out there, it's some pretty challenging things. And it has been challenging to me all week. I struggle. And it'll be a struggle for you. Look at your children. Look at your grandchildren. It's a struggle worth dealing with. We have to. Last week, I had people say, as I visited them in their home, and it's a common question, and they asked this question, Pastor, why isn't America mentioned anywhere in the Bible? It's a simple answer, because we're not going to be here for the end. Why isn't America mentioned in Revelation? Because we won't be here. It won't be because America got raptured. It will be because we pursued other than God's agenda. Go ask the Hebrews, go ask the children of Israel. Every time they pursued someone else's agenda rather than God's, He took them out of their land, put them in captivity for a couple hundred years. So, I understand the struggle is real, but it's worth struggling with. It's worth dealing with these topics. You think I enjoy getting up here and saying this kind of stuff to you? It's been a struggle for me all week. But to be victors rather than victims is sometimes you're going to take the cat by the tail. See, the only way that this deadly cancer, racism, will ever find a cure, here's the misconception. We will never get the cure from the White House. We're never going to get the right person in the White House. The cure doesn't come from the White House. The cure only comes when we get it right in God's house. And it's never going to be right in your house until it's right in God's house. So I want us to look at the problem. Just part of the problem this week, before I delve into some of our history, some of our heritage. Because the reality is, just like I said, history's taught today. I was blessed to be brought up, educated in a college, in a seminary, where I had an Asian teacher, an Asian professor, that I had an African-American professor, that I had all these different ethnic group professors that were not raised and corrupted right here in America. What do you mean corrupted? I mean, they didn't all see and think just like we Americans do. And so the reality is, however you were raised, that's the color glasses you see through. See, that's why God gave us the Bible. So He wants us to see through His glasses. And it's difficult. And so part of the problem is this. Remember that what God is after, God's agenda is that God's idea of humanity and community living together, that's the idea. But here's the problem. And the problem is this. We, us, and including the church, all that we've ever done when we deal with racism, traditionally all we've ever done is address skin color, class, and culture. That's really all that we've ever done. And so going and sitting in a seminar is never going to address the issue. It's never going to get to the heart of the problem. Never going to deal with the root of the issue. But that's what we do. We think education on these issues of color and culture and all of those things, rather the answer, the key to the racism problem is this. It's realizing that God created all of us in His image. And I know that sounds simple. When I get to the end of this point, you'll understand why that's so important. See, that is the key to understanding. Is you need to understand that every single race, culture, and ethnic background was created in the very image of God. Theologians call us and them and every race and every tribe and every tongue image bearers. Did you know you were an image bearer of God? That's what it means to be created in His image. So the next time you look at a person from a different ethnic background, a different skin color, a different culture, put those glasses on. They're image bearers of God. Because those are God's colored glasses rather than our colored glasses. That's the way that God thinks. Let me explain it to you this way. This past weekend, we took a family picnic with someone in the church, and we went down to the Botanical Gardens. Beautiful. How many of you have been down there? How many of you, show of hands, have been down to the Botanical Gardens? You know what's so incredible about all that down there? When you go to the Botanical Gardens, I love the butterfly part of the gardens where they get all those incredibly different colored flowers and all those butterflies come in there. And you know why we love it so much and why it's so beautiful to us? It wouldn't be all that beautiful if it would say, I don't know, gamecock red, and that's all color we had, right? It'd be terrible. All of that draws the butterflies and it draws us because of its multicoloredness. But do you understand that's God's heart too? God's heart is that there be in His kingdom multicoloredness. That is His plan from the very beginning. When you begin to study the heart of God and you begin to study the Bible and you begin to look at God's heart, you see that, you understand it. Do you understand it? And I don't think we do. What does that translate? That God loves multicoloredness. It means He loves varied colors and cultures and ethnic backgrounds. You ever thought about it that way? For me, it was a different way of thinking about it. When I learned that, I knew God loves everybody. I knew God wants to save everybody. But I noticed there's very few integrated churches. Black churches, Asian churches, Caucasian churches. I don't think we have a grasp on it like God does. God began several years ago to teach me this lesson. And there's some things I want you to think through as you look at that. You see, because you were raised in a certain ethnic group, in a certain area, north, south, because you were raised where you were raised, we naturally tend to value one culture over the other, one ethnic background over the other. We naturally tend to do that. It's when you adopt God's agenda that you supernaturally begin to see like God sees. And as you begin to understand that God values multicoloredness. I was with a group of men yesterday and I listened to them. What's amazed me over the years, I don't even know. There have been times when I've calculated, added up, been to something like anywhere from, I don't want to lie, anywhere from 11 to 13 different countries all around the world. 11 to 13 different cultures all around the world. And I've studied extensively Christianity from the time that they put Jesus on the cross till today. I've studied that extensively. And that's why I was taught, and I believe firmly, that God will never pour out His power to open the eyes of a people. That's why Grace needs to take a foreign mission trip once a year. Because when you get out of America, you see just how biased we are. What you don't understand, just how much our beliefs are wrapped up in the flag. But when you begin to study all of God's variedness, you will begin to understand just how much He loves this multicoloredness. And that deals with not just skin color, but cultures. You'd be blown away what other Christians in other parts of the world do. And I promise you, it's holy. It's acceptable. Listen, I meant to tell you, choir, phenomenal job leading us in worship today. But some of you would swallow your teeth if you knew what other cultures did. And it's just as acceptable to God. He inhabits that too. You see, God's far bigger than the one we carry around in our box. He's far bigger than that. And here's what I want you to understand. There's proof of it all through the Bible. God sent His Son to die also for the tribe of Dan toward Ethiopia, just like He did the Benjamites. Did you know, and I want you to think this through, this was something that I learned several years ago, but did you know when you go to Israel, if you knew just how close we were to Jesus coming back, instead of you sitting there thinking, oh, buddy, calling my deacon tonight, he is flat lost at this time. Last week was not even close to this week. But if you knew how close you were to Jesus coming back, you'd be taking notes right now. Because God's end game is that all nations and all tribes and all tongues be at the throne, at the end game. When I went to Israel, I knew this before I went. I knew that a Jew is never bound necessarily by a race. Say, huh? Right now, Israel, and has for the last 10 years, is pouring $100,000 into any Jew that it finds outside of Jerusalem that wants to come home. They're building apartments for them. A Jew in Africa can come home and they'll spend $100,000 in the first year on that Jew, put them in an apartment, teach them Hebrew, get them a job, give them skills, and put them to work. And they're going around the world and have been for 10 years. I wonder why that is. Because He said, those I've scattered at the end, I'll do what? Israel has built 4 of the biggest concrete cement plants on the planet in the last 4 years because they can't keep up with construction because they're bringing so many Jews home. What does that mean? It means it's time to stay off the lake on Sundays and hit the lost people is what it means. You know what else it means? When I went to Israel, I knew, listen to me, Jews are not necessarily bound by race. Well, that means they're African Jews. It means there's Russian Jews. And when I first saw it, that's what it looked like. When I went to Israel, there were the African Jews. Black African Jews. The black Jews. They went to Africa and brought home Jews. there's the Russian Jews. And I've been to Russia and run into the Russian Jews who were making preparations to go home. You didn't know all that, did you? You didn't think beyond your American, and there are American Jews. And by the way, Israeli Jews, African Jews, and Russian Jews don't look like the northern Jews you know from upstate New York and so on. Because that's God's plan. And most Christians can't get their arms around that. That's God's plan. Multicoloredness. Do you know that Simon, the Cyrene, from Cyrene, the Jew, that God chose to pick up and carry Jesus' cross when he could not carry it? He's from northern Africa. He's a black man. He's a black Jew. See, it's always been God's plan. Multicoloredness. Here's the question I have for you. God loves it that way, shouldn't we? Amen. So as we look at the problem, here's where I'm going with all this. See, I'm not saying this to make you mad nor to offend you, but this, all of this, was a struggle for me this week. It challenged me. As I dug in here, as it always does, you know what that does? Takes my glasses off, my perspective off, and it challenges Shawn's kingdom all week long. So I'm just passing it on. What I said, it should challenge you. But here's the answer, number two. You know, the problem is we don't view things like God views them. But here's the answer as you think about it. If we're going to give up our currently held views, and we have to, because if we take God's view, we have to give up our currently held views. See, the problem is there's a huge racial divide in this country. Worse yet, it exists in the church. I have met, not necessarily Grace, but in 19 years of senior pastor ministry, going on soon 20, I have met some of the most racist people in a Baptist church. Matter of fact, I am a Southern Baptist by choice. I'm a Southern Baptist because we're reaching more lost people around the world than no other denomination even comes close. Because we band together, we give to Lottie Moon, we give to Annie Armstrong, we give to the Cooperative Program, and we're putting the gospel around the world. That's why I'm a Southern Baptist. Southern Baptist was formed in the first days out of pure racism. But we can become victims or we become victors. You see, God took what Satan meant for evil. What Satan meant for evil, now the Southern Baptists are reaching more Africans than anybody. We're reaching more lost people than anybody. And yes, we've repented, and yes, we've asked the African American communities forgiveness, because true change of belief and philosophy and kingdom, it does require a little repentance, which is a change in behavior. But as you look at that, some of the worst racists I've ever encountered has been in a Baptist church. It really has. Why? Because our worldview, because our beliefs are more based on our own upbringing and culture than it is on biblical truth. While we may argue about what I'm telling you, while you may ignore what I'm challenging you with, remember I told you there was a point to this sermon to begin with, other than running your lunch today? Making you kick the dog when you go home? Other than sending me ugly letters with no names on them? I just pray for you twice as hard when you do that. Doesn't make me mad. I've been doing this too long. Here's the point. My point was not to be in your face. My point was for you to share the struggle that I've shared this week. But the point of the whole sermon is this. When we don't share God's agenda, you get the America that you live in now, the church. And the root cause of all the church splits and most of the disunity that you see in churches is not following God's agenda. But here's the point of all of it wrapped up in a little bow. When we ignore these truths, when we ignore God's agenda, hell advances and seeks to take a nation back. The nation which Christ gave us. See, lest you think I'm unpatriotic, I love this country. You remember? I told you there was scripture to back it up. Ezekiel 43. Listen to what it says. And I'm sorry, on the PowerPoint, I'm just preaching. I know you got notes. Sometimes I get carried away and preach. Ezekiel 43, listen to what it says. And then he led me to the gate facing east. And behold, the glory of God of Israel was coming from the east. And the sound of his coming was like the sound of many waters. And the east shone with his glory. And the vision I saw was just like the vision that I had seen when he came to destroy the city. And just like the vision that I had seen by the Kabar Canal. And I fell on my face, and as the glory of the Lord entered the temple by the gate facing the east, the Spirit lifted me up, brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple. And while the man was standing beside me, I heard one speaking to me out of the temple, and he said to me, Son of man, Shawn. He said to me, Harold. He said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I dwell in the midst of the people of the Israel forever. And the house of Israel shall no more defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings, by their whoring and by the dead bodies of their kings at their high places, and by the setting their threshold by my threshold, and their doorpost by my doorpost, with only a wall between me and them. They have defiled my holy name by their abominations that they have committed. So I have consumed them in my anger. Now let them put away their whoring and the dead bodies of their kings far from me, and I'll dwell in their midst forever. It ain't Trump and it ain't Hillary. It's me and you, right here on our knees in repentance. Politicians aren't the reason our country's in this shape. We are. You see, I need you to understand why racism is so important, that we conquer it with love. Is because every day we don't, hell advances on this country, and it's taking back what Christ gave us. What do you think that means? It means it's going to take more. You know, we're trying to plan. We went down and we helped rebuild a black church, and our folks went down and worshiped with them. And I'm going to have them here on Sunday night and have a combined worship service. But it's going to take more than a shake, a nod, a hug, a kiss. More than just sending our teenagers to an urban ministry up in the city. And it's going to take more than any seminar. It's going to take you having a passion for different cultures and different people and different nations and different tribes other than your own. That's going to take a change of agenda. Because I need you to understand something. Here's where I'll close. You got a lot more here you need to hear. But you need to remember this. You want to know the truths that I knew, but never, when you put, I say this all the time. If they write that down, they wouldn't say stupid stuff like that. Because when you write stuff down and you read it back to yourself, it just, I knew this, but I've never written it down. I wrote it down this week and wrote it back to myself. You know what? I knew, but God really pointed out to me. Not only is hell advancing on America, Satan's not racist at all. He loves every soul, and he's after them all. But this I know because the Bible tells me so. Jesus isn't racist either. And he died for every soul. You and I need to have the same passion for every soul, every culture, every race, just like he did. Would you bow your heads with me? Father God, Lord God, I know that in the condition of our country, I know these words. I felt like the prophet Jeremiah today, the prophet Ezekiel. I felt like you were calling fire from heaven. But God, I do know it's because you deeply love us. Just like you told Ezekiel in 43, if we'd repent, if we would turn from our wicked ways, if we would allow your love to come into our hearts, change, to take off the blinders, to lift the scales of blindness of racism that Satan has put on us, even the church, we'd allow you to do that. We would see our loved ones saved. We would have a passion for those in our community. God, only you can do it, but I know you only do it when we come and lay our agenda at your cross. So this morning, God, that's my prayer. God, my prayer is that, Lord, there'll be people saved this morning, and they'll come up here and tell me that they want to give their heart to Jesus. My prayer is, God, that there'll be people that will come and say, you know, I need to be baptized, Pastor. And my prayer is there'll be some that will come and say, Pastor, I want to go. I want to charge hell with you with a water pistol. But God, my priority is that one, the church will repent. When the church repents, we'll see the other three happen. God, I mean the Church of America. And I pray we begin here, this group, that you, this community that you've given us, the community of Grace and the community of Oconee County. God, may Grace repent that we might see and reach Oconee. God, I thank you that you aren't racist. Thank you, Jesus, that you value me more than yourself. In Jesus' name, amen. Would you stand and worship this morning? If God lays it on your heart to come and pray for this nation, I found the greatest place would be the altar. If you need to accept Christ this morning, if you need to make a decision of baptism or church membership, you move. But whatever you do, the greatest thing you can do is come to this altar and give Him your agenda and take His home.